Hi, everybody. It is a late night read of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We'll see how far we get in the book today. We are going to finish chapter 5 for sure. When we last read, Lucy and Edmund both made it to Narnia. Edmund is lying and saying it didn't happen, which leads Peter and Susan to think that Lucy is losing her mind or she's really lying. Either way, it's a big problem. So they go to the professor to talk it over, and this is one of my favorite parts in the book. I mean, there's lots of favorite parts, but I like this part where the professor's like, okay, it's one of three things. Either A, she's lying, which you've already told me she's not a liar. 2, she's gone mad, which anybody who talks to her can see is not true. She's not crazy. Which means 3, she's telling the truth. So if these two things are not likely, then it means she's telling the truth. Now, Susan and Peter are like, wait, this guy's telling us that there's really this fantasy land? And Peter says, but do you really mean, sir, that there could be other worlds all over the place just around the corner? Like that? And the professor says, nothing is more probable. But I wonder what they do teach them at these schools. All right, so they're going on. Their final piece of advice that the professor gave them is just to mind their own business. Basically, let it go. And we'll see what the kids do. All right, here we go. The finishing of chapter 5 on this late night read aloud. All right, where was I? After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject, and so for a time it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. This house of the professor's, which even he knew so little about, was so old and famous that people from all over England used to come and ask permission to see it over. It was a sort of house that is mentioned in guidebooks and even in histories. And well it might be, for all manner of stories were told about it, some of them even stranger than the ones I am telling you now. And when parties of sightseers arrived and asked to see the house, the professor always gave them permission, and Mrs. Macready, the housekeeper, showed them around, telling them all about the pictures and the armor and the rare books in the library. Mrs. Macready was not fond of children, and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all the things she knew. She had said to Susan and Peter almost on the first morning, along with a good many other instructions, and please remember that you're to keep out of the way whenever I'm taking a party over the house. Just as if any of us would want to waste half the morning trailing around with a crowd of strange grown-ups, said Edmund, and the other 3 thought the same. That was how the adventure began for the second time. And I'm going to show you a picture of the kids. Make sure I can see. Just kind of exploring the land. And you can see how big the house is there in the background. Quite a lovely place. All right, here we go. A few mornings later, Peter and Edmund were looking at the suit of armor and wondering if they could take it to bits, when the 2 girls rushed into the room and said, "Look out! Here comes the Macready and the whole gang with her." "Sharp's the word," said Peter, and all 4 made off through the door at the far end of the room. But when they got out into the green room and beyond it and into the library, they suddenly heard voices ahead of them and realized that Mrs. Macready must be bringing her party of sightseers up the back stairs, instead of up the front stairs as they had expected. After that, whether it was that they lost their heads, or that Mrs. Macready was trying to catch them, or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere, until at last Susan said, "Oh, bother those trippers! Here, let's get into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in here." But the moment they were inside, they heard voices in the passage, and then someone fumbling at the door. And then they saw the handle turning. "Quick," said Peter, "there's nowhere else." And he flung open the wardrobe. All 4 of them bundled inside it and sat there panting in the dark. Peter held the door closed, but did not shut it, for, of course, he remembered, as every sensible person does, that you should never shut yourself in a wardrobe. Nope, I didn't. Which brings us to chapter 6, Into the Forest. I wish the Macready would hurry up and take all these people away, said Susan presently. I'm getting horribly cramped. And what a filthy smell of camphor, said Edmund. I expect the pockets of these coats are full of it, said Susan, to keep away the moths. There's something sticking in my back, said Peter. And isn't it cold, said Susan. Now that you mention it, it is cold, said Peter. And hang it all, it's wet, too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet, and it's getting wetter every minute. And he struggled to his feet. Let's get out, said Edmund. They've gone. Oh, said Susan suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. I'm sitting against a tree, said Susan. And look, it's getting light over there. By Jove, you're right, said Peter. And look there and there. It's trees all around. And this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all. And now there was no mistaking it, and all 4 children stood blinking in the daylight of the winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. I apologize for not believing you, he said. I'm sorry. Will you shake hands? Of course, said Lucy, and did. And now, said Susan, what do we do next? Do, said Peter. Why, go and explore the wood, of course. Ugh, said Susan, stomping her feet. It's pretty cold. What about putting on some of these coats? But they're not ours, said Peter doubtfully. I'm sure no one would mind, said Susan. It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't even take them out of the wardrobe. I never thought of that, Sue, said Peter. Of course, now that you put it that way, I see. No one could say you had begged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe. They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so they came down to their heels, and they looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-up and more suitable to the landscape. We can pretend to be Arctic explorers, said Lucy. This is going to be exciting enough without pretending, said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before night. I say, said Edmund presently, oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left, that is, if we're aiming for the lamp-post? He had forgotten for a moment that he must pretend never have to been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped, everyone stared at him, and Peter whistled. So, you really were here, he said. That time Luce said she'd met you in here, and you made out that she was telling lies? There was a dead silence. Well, of all the poisonous little beasts, said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders, and said no more. There seemed, indeed, no more to say, and presently the 4 resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, I'll pay you all for this, you pack of stuck-ups, self-satisfied prigs. Where are we going anyway? Said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. I think Lou ought to be the leader, said Peter. Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou? What about going to see Mr. Tumnus? Said Lucy. He's the nice fawn I told you about. Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stomping their feet. Lucy proved a good leader. At first she wondered whether she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree on one place and a stump on another, and brought them on to where the ground became uneven, and into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken to bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the doorway and was heaped on the floor, mixed with something black which turned out to be the charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and then stomped it out. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed into shreds with a knife. "This is a pretty good washout," said Edmund. "Not much good coming here." "What is this?" said Peter, swooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper which had been nailed through the carpet onto the floor. "Is there something written on it?" asked Susan. "Yes, I think there is," answered Peter, "but I can't read it in this light. Let's get out into the open air." And they all went out into the daylight and crowded round Peter as he read out the following words. "The former occupants of these premises, the Fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting trial on the charge of high treason against her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chantelin of Carpavel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc., also of comforting her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Mugrim, Captain of the Secret Police. Long live the Queen!" The children stared at each other. Now here's a picture of the entrance to Mr. Tumnus's, what used to be a cozy, comfy little home. "I don't know that I'm going to like this place after all," said Susan. "Who is this Queen, Lou?" asked Peter. "Do you know anything about her?" "She isn't a real queen at all," answered Lucy. "She's a horrible witch, the White Witch. Everyone, all the wood people, hate her. She has made an enchantment over the whole country, so that it is always winter here and never Christmas." I wonder if there's any point in going on," said Susan. "I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if it won't be much fun either, and it's getting colder every minute, and we've brought nothing to eat. What about just going home?" "Oh, we can't, said Lucy suddenly. "Don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It's all on my account that the poor fawn has gotten into trouble. He hid me from the witch and showed me the way back. That's what it means by comforting the Queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We simply must try to rescue him." "A lot we could do," said Edmund, "when we haven't even got anything to eat." "Oh, shut up, you," said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. "What do you think, Susan?" "I've a horrible feeling that Lou was right," said Susan. "I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come, but I think we must try to do something for Mr. whatever his name is. I mean the fawn." "That's what I feel too," said Peter. "I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back and getting something from the larder, only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting back into this country again once you've got out of it. I think we'll have to just go on." "So do I," said both the girls. "If only we knew where the poor chap was imprisoned," said Peter. They were all wondering what to do next when Lucy said, "Look, there's a robin, and such a red breast. It's the first bird I've seen here, I say. I wonder, can birds talk in Narnia? It almost looks as if it wanted to say something to us." And then she turned to the robin and said, "Please, can you tell us where Tumnus the fawn has been taken to?" As she said this, she took a step toward the bird. It at once flew away, only as far as to the next tree. There it perched and looked at them very hard, as if it understood all they'd been saying. Almost without noticing what they had done, the 4 children went a step or 2 nearer to it, and this robin flew away again to the next tree, and once more looked at them very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. "Do you know," said Lucy, "I really believe he means for us to follow him." "I've an idea he does," said Susan. "What do you think, Peter?" "Well, we might as well try it," answered Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly. It kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them, but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way it led them on slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently the clouds parted overhead, and the winter sun came out, and the snow all around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about half an hour, with the two girls in front, when Edmund said to Peter, "If you're not so still high and mighty to talk to me, I've something to say which you'd better listen to." "What is it?" asked Peter. "Shh, not so loud," said Edmund. "There's no good frightening the girls. But have you realized what we're doing?" "What?" said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. "We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side that bird is on? Why shouldn't it be leading us into a trap?" "That's a nasty idea still. A robin, you know. They're good birds in all the stories I've ever read. I'm sure a robin wouldn't be on the wrong side." "If it comes to that, what is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are in the right and the queen, yes, I know what she's been told, that she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't know anything about either." "The fawn saved Lucy." "He said he did, but how do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of the way home from here?" "Great Scott," said Peter. "I hadn't thought about that." "No chance of dinner either," said Edmund. And at that, we are going to stop. There's a picture. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't know if you can see there's a little bird here. That's his tail. Let me look at it again here. Okay, it's kind of upside down. So the tail is up, and the bird is kind of nestling his head at his feet. And our next chapter, chapter 7, A Day with the Beavers. Okay, there we go, guys. So they are all in Narnia. The adventure has begun. All right, we'll read to you guys soon. Talk to you later. Have a nice day.